This is lecture 6 on urban transportation planning. We will continue with conceptual aspects in this lecture after recollecting the essence of the previous lecture. You may recall that we started our discussion in the previous lecture with the clear understanding that the process of urban transportation planning is part art and part science. Then we tried to understand the overall planning process in such a way that we take an overview of the different steps involved in the planning. We now know the first important step in the planning process is prediction of the horizon near land use pattern in an urban area, and based on that prediction of the total travel demand. Next important step is creating alternative solutions, alternative transport systems to meet the horizon year travel demand. Next, analysis of each of the alternatives by studying their characteristics carefully while they are in operation. And finally, choice of the optimal alternative based on economic consideration. We just check for the difference between the benefits and costs in each of these alternatives and choose the one which has got a maximum difference between benefit and cost. Then we understood that the systems engineering process can be applied for transportation systems planning also. In that context, we try to list the different steps in the systems engineering process, starting from socio-economic environment and so on. In connection with systems engineering process, we defined a set of important terms. First, we defined the term system, then environment, then we defined the term in general goal. With the understanding of the basic conceptual aspects related to these aspects, we concluded the previous lecture. Just to check ourselves whether we have accurately recapitulated some of the points of the previous lecture, let me just pose a few questions to you. The first question is this: why urban transportation planning is part art and part science? Anybody? Why urban transportation planning is part art and part science? I think you clearly know the definition of art and science. Let me answer this question. Urban transportation planning cannot be done only based on scientific principles. The planner cannot just estimate the total travel demand and provide for the basic components of the transportation system, namely the way, the vehicle, the terminal and the control. The planner should give due consideration to the sensitivities of the urban dwellers on various issues, their emotional aspects, their intellectual likes and dislikes. All these aspects should go into the planning process. When these aspects are taken into account in the planning process, you cannot explain every decision taken in the planning process based on rational aspects, based on scientific principles. That is why it is going to be a mix of consideration to the various likes and dislikes of the urban dwellers as well as application of scientific principles. That is how we must understand urban transportation systems planning process to be part art and part science. The second question is, give the list of land use into which the urban areas are divided for the purpose of transportation systems planning.
residential, recreational, industrial, agriculture, forest land, then
yes, institutional and so on. So that is how we divide the urban land uses into different categories at a macro level to facilitate categorization of the urban land use based on the use to which they are predominantly put to in urban areas. The third question is very specific. Define the terms system, environment and goal. Anybody who can define the term system?
A system may be defined as a set of components that is organized in a manner so as to direct the action of systems in which the inputs towards specific goals and objectives.
Good, maybe you have noted down the definition and reading out, nothing wrong, at least others get the point. And how do we define environment? Of course, I will repeat the definition of system, that will give you some clue for the definition of environment. System is nothing but a set of components arranged or organized in such a manner, given inputs it directs the outputs towards the set goals and objectives, right. That is how we understand the definition of a system. How do we define environment now? Please.
Environment is a set of components which are outside the system, which influence the system and which in turn get influenced by the system.
Good, perfect. So the definition of environment is this: it is again a set of components but outside the system, which influences the behavior of the system and in turn gets influenced by the behavior of the system. For a transportation system, what is the environment? In general, you must understand the socio-economic characteristics of the urban dwellers provide the environment for the transportation system, right. The input to the system comes out of the socio-economic environment of the urban dwellers. If there are more rich people, there is going to be more input to the private vehicles or luxurious public transit vehicles. If there are considerable proportion of middle class people, there is going to be more input towards the transit system, right. So the environment is nothing but the socio-economic characteristics of the urban dwellers, the people, right. And finally goal. Anybody who can define goal?
So goal is the end towards which any plan tends.
Good.
It gives a sense of direction to the plans.
It is not exactly the end point,
So,
right. Do you agree with this statement? Yeah, goal is just a point towards which the plan tends, it is not exactly reaching the point, and goal gives an expression of the desire in abstract terms towards which we continuously work to reach, but very rarely we reach the end point or the set goal. That is how we need to understand goal. And with this understanding, let us proceed further and try to define the term objective. You may recall that as far as this course is concerned, we decided to have different definitions for goals and objectives. In that context, you must understand the definition given here. An objective may be conceived or understood as a lower order goal which at least conceptually is capable of being measured. You will not be able to quantify and accurately measure, but you will be able to conceptually have a feel of measurement of attainment of an objective. We will just start with the example that we took yesterday in the previous class. I said Sharmila telling that I would like to be a rich person could be a goal. Suppose Kartika wants to know a little more precisely from her, what exactly you mean by I want to become rich? She might respond by saying that I would like to own a big bungalow, luxurious cars. Some additional input is there, but still it is only conceptual. There is no quantification, but that some clarity is added to the goal. Suppose let us say Rajashekar, he says I would like to be a social worker, or I would like to do social service. It is just a goal. Can you think of an objective for this goal? Maybe he might say I would like to run an orphanage. Just an orphanage, it is again qualitative, but gives little additional clarity to the goal. So that is how you need to understand the definition of an objective, right? And for example, a typical community goal might be to ensure that the entire amenities, example job opportunities, housing, maybe health facilities and so on of the urban area are available to all socio-economic groups within the community. What is given here is the example of a community goal, and we need to derive the objective, isn't it? That is what is given here. The example given is the example for goal. Can we think of some objective for this goal related to transportation system planning process? This goal is common for any developmental work in the urban area. It is a very common community goal, but we must pick the relevant portion which is applicable for our planning process. Any suggestion? Yes, please.
Widening of roads, or maybe increasing the number of density of road per square kilometer.
Yeah, that is fine. These are very specific points related to infrastructure development. At the planning stage, we do not talk about the specific aspects related to the components of a transportation system. We just think of policy statements. I will give you the relevant objective, then probably you will be able to connect it much better. One objective for this goal is this: to maximize and equalize the accessibility to urban activities by public transport from all residential areas. It is a highly loaded sentence. To maximize and equalize the accessibility to urban activities by public transport from all residential areas. Please go back and look at the statement of a goal. Our goal is to make or to ensure that the amenities of the urban area are available to all socio-economic groups within the community. That is the goal, and the related objective is this: to maximize and equalize the accessibility to urban activities by public transport. By public transport is very important because we are concerned with all socio-economic group, including economically weaker section. That is why the words by public transport are here, the objective, from all residential areas. Would you accept this as an objective related to the goal? It is just a policy statement, right, similar to saying that I will own a bungalow and a luxurious car, or I will just run an orphanage. It gives some idea, but still qualitative. A third concept that must be introduced in dealing with the goal hierarchy of a system is standard. Why third concept? Because planners will not be able to work with only goals and objectives, they just give qualitative impression. Planners need to have some quantitative guidance, otherwise they cannot find out whether they are tending towards a particular set point or not. That is why we need to go further and add more clarity to the set objectives. Let us go back to the two examples that we discussed. General example, owning a big bungalow and luxurious car. When she is asked to add more clarity, let us say she says, I would like to own a 5-bedroom bungalow in a 5-ground plot and 2 Volkswagen cars. Now there are some numbers and clarity is almost 100%. What exactly she meant initially that I would like to be rich, isn't it? You get all the information. Similarly, if the other person says, instead of just I would like to run an orphanage, if he says that I would like to run an orphanage at least having a strength of 30 inmates, let us say 30 inmates, then there is perfect clarity and it is a complete statement. So that kind of information has to be given. Finally, it should be quantitatively measurable. So that is what we are meaning here by standard. Okay. Let us try to get some standard for the stated objective. A standard is lower order than objective and represents a condition that is capable of both measurement and attainment. Standard is measurable as well as attainable. Let us try to get a standard for the stated objective. For example, the transport system objective stated earlier. I hope all of you recollect the stated objective, otherwise I will go back. Let us read the objective and get back. This is the objective: to maximize and equalize the accessibility to urban activities by public transport from all residential areas. This is objective. We are trying to get standard for this objective. Adopting a standard such as the transport system should permit the principal urban activity centers to be reached from major residential areas by public transport services with travel times not greater than 30 minutes. There is some quantitative aspect, right. This is what we mean by accessibility to job opportunities and other activities to all sections of the society by providing good public transport service. Now we introduce a quantitative term indicating that the travel time should not be more than 30 minutes to reach out from home to any major activity center in a particular city or town. There is no sanctity about the number 30, it depends upon the city you are handling. It could be 40 or 50 or sometimes 22, right. One important aspect to be understood is any standard should have some quantitative aspect. If the planner has got this kind of information, then he or she will be very clear as to how to go about planning for the whole system. There will be hundreds of standards given to the planner. This is one example. So planner can easily orient the planning process to meet all the set standards. Now let us consider one example with a community goal of this. Let us say the community goal is maximize mobility of people and goods. This is urban community goal. Even though it is very specific to transportation, still in cities and urban areas where there is a major transportation problem of all kinds, this could be one of the goals of the urban community itself. First, maximize mobility of people and goods. Let us do everything possible to maximize mobility of people and goods in a particular city or town. So it is a very general statement, and it is just a statement which indicates the direction only. Shall we just try to develop a set of objectives for this goal? What are the possible objectives for this goal? Any suggestion? We just would like to maximize mobility of the people and goods. I will just give you one example, then you will be able to get along the same line. So we generally say minimize travel time, make your modes faster so that mobility is made easier and people are encouraged to make more trips. It could be any mode, any route. It is a very general statement. Minimize travel time, and let us say minimize travel cost. Is it possible to minimize travel cost? In a private transport system it may be difficult because it depends upon the cost of operation, but in the operation of public transit it is possible to minimize cost, to encourage people to make more trips by providing required subsidy by the government. It is possible. So by some means, if you are minimizing travel cost, then the level of mobility will increase, is not it? And there are other possible objectives. Provide adequate frequency of service. You should not just run a bus once in 2 hours, people will be vexed and many may not make trips. Provide adequate frequency of service. Provide adequate system capacity. How to ensure that you are providing adequate system capacity?
By knowing what is the strength of the people, how much people travel through that system, we can find the adequate capacity of the system.
By knowing
it may be a survey or through some other means we can find out the strength or the maximum number of people traveling in that system, which can give you with average capacity of the system, people traveling in the system.
Right. So what you mean is we should know the total travel demand on a particular route as well as the temporal spread of the demand or spread of the demand over time, so that we know the quantum of demand spread over time. Accordingly we can provide the adequate service. Adequate means what? Yeah, there should not be any passenger left out for non-availability of the service. Okay. So everybody should be able to get the service at the desired point of time on a particular route or on a desired route. Provide adequate system safety. That is very important. If your system is unsafe, some people who are concerned about safety may avoid traveling frequently. Why should I take a risk? Let me stay at home. So system safety is very important. So if you want to encourage or enhance mobility, you must ensure the required level of safety in the transport system operation. Provide adequate system reliability. What do you understand by system reliability? It should be functional. We are talking about transport system reliability. How do we understand system reliability?
the entire passenger system what we are using, the vehicles which are involved should be functional and should not break down frequently.
Yes, should
And there
not
should be
break
a
down. Yes,
there should be a proper maintenance or some workshop for
yes,
that
yeah,
to cover up the and there should be some system to cover up. Supposing there is some breakdown, then additional should be kept in hand so that immediately the demand can be met.
okay, spare fleet should be available to make up for the unexpected breakdowns. That is one aspect of reliability. Even maintaining the schedule correctly makes the system reliable. If the schedule is not maintained, if a bus is expected to be at 5 p.m. at a particular bus stop, if the bus arrives at that time, then the bus service is reliable. Instead of 5 p.m. if the bus arrives by 5:30 one day and 5:10 another day, 5:20 third day, then the service is not reliable. It unnecessarily puts the travelers into discomfort. So that is also very important aspect related to reliability, maintaining schedule, avoiding breakdowns as he pointed out, and so on. And let us try to list the related standards for at least one standard for each of these stated objectives. The first objective, you can go back and look. First objective is to minimize travel time. Anybody who can give a standard for this objective? Minimize travel time. There are several possibilities. Only clue is you must introduce some number into it, and still it should be a policy statement. It should not be pertinent to specific aspect. I will give this as example. The travel time by public transport between major activity centers not to exceed 30 minutes. It is a general policy statement, still contains some number as a specific guideline for the planners. So this is how you must derive standards for a stated objective. Can we think of a standard for the second objective? What is the second objective? Minimize travel cost, isn't it? You may recollect, minimize travel cost was objective number 2.
Per kilometer rate for traveling in a bus should be less than 2 rupees or something.
Less than 2 rupees, that is fine. And when you give some numbers related to fare in absolute terms, that may not be valid over a long period of time due to inflation and so on. We are talking about planning for 2 decades. So our numbers should be reliable numbers which can be referred to as a guidance for the entire planning period. So in that context, this may be a standard for this second objective. The travel cost by public transport not to exceed 15% of the cost of travel by private transport. Whatever may be the fluctuation in the transport cost, we are just giving a comparative value. Travelers will be traveling by private and public transport modes. See that the cost of travel by public transport is not more than 15% of the cost of travel by private transport, by car or motorcycle and so on. So this will stand the time period that we consider. What is the third objective that we considered? We will go back. Provide adequate frequency of service. We will try to recollect the fourth one also, provide adequate system capacity. What is the objective that you propose for the third objective? This is the one which will be more appropriate. The frequency of public transport service on any route to be not less than 3 per hour. You can understand that we are giving some limiting values. That is what is required. what is the minimum standard we expect out of a public transport service has to be made very clear to the planner. So the planner will know that somehow there should be 3 services made available on any route per hour. That will guide us to work out the fleet requirement and other operational details later while you implement the scheme. And the standard for the next objective about capacity, it is very difficult to give exact numbers. I have given a statement, but still it gives you indirectly a number. The peak hour occupancy of public transport vehicles not to exceed permissible limits. Why I have not given numbers? Because over a period of time bus size may change, capacity of buses may vary, but our concern is about the capacity of the system. If you ensure that even during peak hour, okay, the capacity is not exceeding the permissible limit in any vehicle, then you are providing adequate capacity. Let us say 25% seated and 20 standing, totally 45 in a bus service. So at a particular point of time for any bus the demand should not be more than 45, that is the meaning. So this takes care of the possible changes in the system characteristics, still provides you with some number. And next, what is the next objective that we have listed? Safety. And it is very difficult to give a standard for safety because safety itself is qualitative or complex issue. Safety of course related to accidents involving property damage, minor injuries, major injuries or fatalities or combination of all. And how to give a number related to level of safety. Let us try out and see what can be done. This is one possible way of providing a standard regarding safety. Fatal accidents involving public transport vehicles to be less than 1% of the total. How do we get this number 1%? It should be based on the past record. You may have accident record and you may have comparison of the accidents involving public transport vehicles and total number of accidents. You just try to improve the system to the extent possible and fix up some number like 1% or 2%. Okay, this will be a very clear standard for planning purpose. Then reliability. This is how we can fix a standard for reliability. At least 95% of public transport operation to be as per the published time schedule. This is the most important aspect. What happens today to the public transit users, particularly bus transit users in our cities and towns? When you go to a bus stop, do you have the schedule of operation of the buses displayed in the bus stop? No, you do not know which bus will come at what time. No information, no documentation available at the bus stops. In my opinion, this is a very basic requirement for the travelers to understand the operation of the transit system. When this itself is not provided, we can say that the level of service provided by the transit system is very poor. This implies that we are just tolerating the very poor service provided by bus transit system in the whole of our country. I have not heard about this kind of schedule being displayed at bus stops in any city so far. I will just give my experience in using bus service when I used to visit Germany. This kind of display used to be there at every bus stop. There will be dynamic message signs indicating even possible changes of times in major bus stops. Minor bus stops will have clear display of the schedule of operation of buses and all the routes. There will be one schedule for the period from Monday to Friday, Saturday another schedule, Sunday a different schedule. I was a regular bus user to go from my place of stay to the university. I have never found bus service to be deviating from the scheduled time by not more than or more than just a minute. There could be variation of about a minute between the scheduled time and the actual arrival or departure of a bus. I used to get astonished as to how these people are able to maintain such a perfect schedule of operation, whereas in our case we are unable to. Of course, there are reasons. The bus operators say that our roads are not reliable. They get suddenly congested due to various reasons, processions or passing of VIPs through a particular route. All these things cause delay to traffic. But in spite of that, taking all these variations into account, still if you look at the reliability of bus operation in our country, it is very poor. The service is very, very poor, right. So that is what is meant here. The planner should aim for such a reliability level, at least 95% of public transport operation to be as per the published time schedule. Let us take another example to reinforce our idea of goals, objectives and standards. Let us take a quite common community goal of reducing air pollution. Major metropolitan cities experience today in our country suffocating air pollution level, injurious to health. So obviously this will be a very important community goal, reduce air pollution. And you have to come out and tell me what are the possible objectives for this goal in transportation systems planning process. We need to reduce air pollution. Please understand, urban transportation is about moving people from origin to destination and not about moving vehicles. It is about moving people and not about moving vehicles. That is how a planner has to understand the transportation process or urban travel. This is a clue for your answer. Let us now fix an objective for this goal.
The use of non-motorized transports.
Encourage the use of non-motorized transport. Good. That is very important objective, very relevant for this goal. Any other objective?
It could be to increase the percentage of people by a certain laid down percentage who are using public transportation for, let us say, daily commuting to work.
Good. Encouraging people to make use of public transport vehicles, providing patronage for public transport. I think the two objectives are made very clear by you, and so let me list them formally. Maximize usage of public transport modes. Using public transport, you can carry more people with less number of vehicles, which will result in relatively less air pollution. That is the idea. That is how it is related to the goal of reducing air pollution. And then encourage use of non-motorized modes of transport, which is totally pollution free. Now we need to identify a set of standards. Need not be only one standard. There could be a number of standards for a single objective. Let us try to derive as many standards as possible for the first objective, namely maximize usage of public transport modes. Can you come out with some ideas? Maximizing usage of public transport modes, some standards. Yes, it is already known to you, the travel time by public transport between major activity centers not to exceed 40 minutes, let us say. This enhances the level of service of public transport. This implies that we are encouraging use of public transport, is not it? And I will just follow the same sequence as we did in the previous case. Then about travel cost. The travel cost of public transport not to exceed 20% of the cost of travel by private transport. I have given you different numbers here to make the point that it is not necessary to just add sanctity to any number, it depends upon the situation. Third, the frequency of public transport service on any route to be not less than, let us say, 4 per hour, right. And fourth, all these standards are related to the stated objective of encouraging public transport. Fourth, the peak hour occupancy of public transport vehicles not to exceed the permissible limits. Occupancy means number of persons sitting in a vehicle is occupancy, okay. That should not exceed the permissible limit. Then fatal accidents, to make these public transport safe, fatal accidents involving public transport vehicles to be less than 2% of the total. Why we are concerned about only fatal accidents? Because it is fatal, concerned with your life. So that is how we need to understand the importance of relating safety with fatal accidents. 6, at least 90% of public transport operation to be as per the published time schedule. That is about reliability of operation. You can realize now that these standards are equally applicable to the previously stated objective, right. So if you look at carefully, all these standards and objectives are oriented towards encouraging public transport modes. If you want to provide equal opportunities for urban community of all economic groups, and if you want to reduce air pollution, as we have stated here, the only way out is encouraging public transport service by fixing standards as we have listed now, right. Now let us try to identify a set of standards for the second objective, encouraging non-motorized modes of transport. In the urban context, you can understand bicycle and foot as the popular non-motorized modes of transport. How do we encourage bicycle? Encouraging non-motorized mode of transport. We must give a policy statement. We cannot say just provide 5-meter wide bicycle track along major traffic corridors. That becomes a detailed implementation guideline. It should be a policy statement. I understand it is not that easy. We must first understand typically or ideally land use planning and transport planning should be done simultaneously. Some standards may have linkages with land use planning also, even though they are standards for transport system planner, that may have some linkage with the land use planning process. This is a typical example. The possible standard for the stated objective is this: travel time by bicycle from home to medium size activity centers, medium size commercial areas, for example middle schools, elementary schools, some day to day service centers. That is what we need to understand by medium size activity centers, to be not more than 15 minutes. One should be able to ride a bicycle for 15 minutes and reach out to most of the medium size activities to satisfy their day to day need. So, it is related to the location of activity centers as well as provision of one component of the transport system, namely the ride pathway connectivity between home and the nearby activity centers. So, this is a simple policy statement, still provides a clear cut number for the planner to understand clearly what is meant by this particular statement. Then travel time by foot from home to minor activity centers named neighborhood centers, which are at walkable distance, to be not more than 15 minutes. Okay. Any minor activity should be able to be accessed with not more than 15 minutes of walking. So, this is again a guideline provided simultaneously both to the transport system planner as well as land use planner. That is how you need to understand the standards for this particular objective of encouraging non-motorized modes of transport. Now, let us try to summarize what we have discussed in this class. We extended the previous class discussion to understand and define the term objective, and then we defined the term standard. Then we took an example of urban community goal and tried to list a set of objectives first, and then try to list a set of standards. Now, we are clear that unless the planning process gets the guidance from the urban community goal, the planning process will not be a successful exercise. You must look at the document giving the urban community goals. There could be a set of goals. Pick the goals that are relevant to transport system planning, list those goals, then list the objectives related to each of these goals in respect of transport system planning. Then try to derive standards incorporating quantifiable numbers, so that ultimately you have a set of standards for each of the objectives which are correlated to each of the goals of the urban community. That is how we need to understand the guidance that we need to provide to the transportation system planner. With this, we will conclude our discussion for today. We will continue our discussion in the next lecture.